back on the Value Podcast, and I'm back with Chay McFarland. So I want to do the introduction of how, I met you at the mall, and while I was just in purpose doing what I was doing, serving the people, and then you began to explain to me your story. And I don't want to try to tell the story because I don't want to mess the story up. But I am sitting here with Chay McFarland and a world changer. And from my initial meeting of you, the things that you told me really impacted me. I talk about the value of relationships so much. And right from that moment, I valued your relationship because the impact that you were having on relationships with people that I haven't even met. But I thought it was amazing because it's very transformative what you're doing. So you can tell the people exactly what you do briefly, and then we're going to go deep into this Value Podcast.
Well, thank you so much, Jamel, for having me on again. I do value our relationship, and I love to come by the spot at Cumberland and talk with you, and we never seem to have enough time to really cover everything that we start to talk about. But I would encourage anyone, while you're at Cumberland, please go by the kiosk and visit with Jamel and purchase some things because it's very important that we support each other. And that was how I met you. I was just shopping on a regular day. I had just come home from federal prison, and I happened to see you and asked about your kiosk, and it went from there. So what you talk about as far as the value of relationships and the value of people is so true, because you never know when you throw your pebble in how far your ripple is going to go. And my personal story, which I've shared with you before, I was an attorney here in Atlanta. And in 2005, I was indicted along with my clients for mortgage fraud. And I was the real estate closing attorney, so I filed the deeds. And under the conspiracy law, if you have even the smallest part, whether you intended to commit fraud or not, you can be brought in and indicted under conspiracy. I chose to go to trial, and I was convicted. All of my co-defendants testified against me, and they all received sentences. The most that any of them got was one who had prior convictions received 87 months. The judge sentenced me to 360 months. So if you're trying to do the math quickly, that equates to 30 years.
1 second. Now I'm knowing this. I didn't know that everybody testified against you.
Yes, they all testified for deals.
So for layman's terms, they snitched.
You can call it that. It's called government cooperation.
Yeah, okay. That's the legal term.
Right.
The street term is snitch.
And you receive what's called a 5K reduction, which is a reduction in your sentence for government cooperation. Mm-hmm. Okay.
What's going on, beautiful people? I'm sorry I had to interrupt your value time, but people have been asking me, Jamel, how do I support the Value Podcast? I want to show some love. Well, you can go to VPAPOV.com. That's VPAPOV.com and grab yourself some value gear. And for those that have been watching and they say, man, I like this wisdom, I like the conversations that's taking place, how can I work with you one-on-one? You can go to JamelDJackson.com. That's JamelDJackson.com. Click the link, head to the website. Let's work together. I want to see you have the best, amazing, healthy relationships in your life. Back to the podcast.
So, with that being said, I was sentenced to 30 years. I go off to federal prison. At that time, my daughter had just turned 4. So she essentially grew up without a mother. Thank God my parents were there to help raise her. And she's very successful now. She's a junior in college, and I'm very proud of her. But my story is one of blessings and being fortunate enough to have a family to support me. Because I met so many women who lost their children went into the system. They don't know where their children are, or their children were placed with family members and they were ultimately abused. So for me, it was a blessing that I didn't have to encounter any of those, but my story is more or less the exception rather than the rule. But I was serving my sentence. I served roughly 16 years of that sentence, and then COVID hit. And so under the CARES Act, which was passed, I was allowed to be transferred to home confinement with an ankle monitor based upon the fact that I'm asthmatic and I have some other medical conditions, which would have made me a candidate for having, if I were to contract COVID, I would probably die within the institution. So to lessen the population, if you had medical conditions and you had done at least 50% of your time, you were allowed to transfer to home confinement. And I came home on an ankle monitor, and that was in June. Actually, it was 1 year ago exactly today. On June 9th is the day I walked out of federal prison.
Wow,
hold on.
It's
my anniversary today.
This is amazing. Yes. Like, we didn't set this up.
No, we didn't.
So this is your anniversary, yes. And you're telling your testimony.
Right. At this time last year, I was in the car. My daughter picked me up, and we were on the highway coming back to Atlanta. So truly, it is a blessing and an amazing day for me today.
Wow. Let me ask you this. How old were you when you went in?
Let's see. I was 36, roughly.
36.
Yeah, 36.
Okay.
And I did 16 years, came home, and then the most amazing thing happened. And I know the majority of the people hate President Trump, but I am grateful to President Trump because on his last day in office, at the 11th hour, he gave me executive clemency, which ended my federal sentence. So with the CARES Act, ironically, the people that have been placed on ankle monitors and sent home, there is a memo now that says that when COVID is considered concluded and no longer a national emergency, they must return to prison. And that is just insane because people have been home for over a year or longer. They've gotten jobs, they've gotten apartments, they've bonded again with their families and their children. They're paying taxes, they're doing everything that they're supposed to do. And now they tell them that, okay, well, despite all of that, you need to come back to prison and serve the remaining part of your sentence.
Hold on a second. I get out of prison because of this COVID, or now do they have clemency?
No, they're still on the ankle monitor. And even though they're transferred to home confinement, you have to feed, clothe yourself and pay for all your medical costs yourself. So while you're in prison, of course, they give you three hots and a cot is what they say, and they cover your medical. Well, when you're transferred to home confinement, that is upon you and your family. So unless you're independently wealthy, you got to get a job. And so you go through whoever's monitoring you, whether it's the halfway house or probation, because they divide up the caseload depending upon where you live and a few other factors. And you have to check in with them daily, several times a day. You have to call in. They call you to make sure you're where you're supposed to be. You call when you leave your home to go to work. You call when you get there. You call when you're coming home. Everything is monitored. It is extremely restrictive. And so you do that, and you're doing everything that you're supposed to do. And then one day you can get a call that says you have to return to prison.
That is insane. Like, I'm out here, I'm free, I'm cooperating, I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, I'm trying to make ends meet, and then I get a call that says, oh yeah, you know what? When you get off work today, come back. You're about to serve the rest of your time in prison.
Exactly. And it's pointless because obviously these people are proving that they're not a danger to the community. So you have to ask the question, well, why do you need these people back? And then that takes us into what we talked about, which is the beast called the prison industrial complex, where people are making money off of modern day slavery. It's essentially what it is.
Before you get into that, I want to talk about, because I read that while you were in there, I want to talk about briefly while you were in prison, that you were teaching Chinese and Africans how to speak English. Well,
yes. I mean, I chose to serve my time by serving others, because when you come in, obviously your whole life is gone. And when you have a sentence like mine with a 30-year sentence, that was the equivalent of a life sentence to me. I couldn't imagine going from being, a vibrant 30-year-old to getting out when I'm 62. It just, I couldn't understand that. And I was extremely bitter. I was very bitter with my co-defendants, very angry, because if we all conspired to do something together and you testified against me, I would take it on the chin because this is what we did. But when the government allows you to lie and encourages you to lie and twist things, it I still can't grasp how the justice system is so much an injustice system, because it has nothing to do with culpability so much as it does making a case. And there's a thing that defense attorneys say, that the grand jury can indict a paperclip if they choose to do so, and that is honestly the truth. If they have you dead to rights and they say, well, we'll reduce your sentence if you say this, and this, or the way they put it is they say, isn't it true that Mr. So-and-so and yourself did this, and this? And all you have to do is say yes. And then they normally use those statements to pressure you to enter a plea, which is why 98% of all federal criminal cases are resolved with a plea. That's why they have such a high conviction rate, because pleas are considered convictions. It's not that people are going to trial and losing at trial, but the rate for losing at trial is very high because they're able to get all of this information. And I'm not saying that all prosecutors are corrupt. I'm saying that the system itself is corrupt. And what it does, it rewards prosecutors based upon their conviction rate. So you're going to try to get as many convictions as possible by any means necessary. And if it is it really about punishing someone or not? I have a case now with a gentleman that I advocate for, Terrence Cole, and he's a first-time offender, never been arrested. He was involved in a drug case out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. His connect, the Dominican guy that sold him the drugs, was allowed to testify against him, and he was able to pretty much walk and go home. And Terrence gets a life sentence plus 40 years, and he's never even been in jail before. Where is the fairness in that? How was that allowed to happen? And I do believe that if you commit a crime, that there has to be rules in society, and that there are sentences that are somewhat necessary, but I don't believe that the sentences have to be so egregious and long as they are now, particularly when it comes to Black and brown people. They are sentenced far harsher and more often than their white counterparts, and we make up a smaller percentage of the population, and so it's just not right.
And you told me that I don't know if you said that at the beginning of this, but there was a white woman who did the same particular crime as you did in terms of mortgage fraud, and she got sentenced to 27 to 30 months?
Okay, there were two. They were white males.
Okay, white males.
In my case, the losses were estimated to be right around $12 million, which is not real money, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But in their case, it was $20 million, and those two attorneys, one got 42 months and the other got 33 months. And I got 360 months for basically, I won't even say it was the exact same behavior, because their behavior was far more in depth than what mine was. But it was the same judge, the same prosecutor. And the judge in my case said that he was sentencing me to such a harsh sentence so I could serve as an example to other attorneys that decided to participate in fraud. But then less than a year later, he has two white attorneys that come before him, and he sentenced them to less than 5 years each.
Now, you're in there and you're coming out, but obviously when you're in there, how did that impact the relationship between you and your family, your friends, your daughter, specifically your daughter, because she was so young when you went in? And she's losing her mom now to this 30-year sentence.
You learn to parent from prison. And like I said, when you asked me about me teaching English, I chose to, once I got over the feeling sorry for myself and the anger, which was very short-lived, because I'm just not that type of person. So I had to forgive everyone and move forward. And I didn't forgive them for them. I did it for me, so that I could be free from the hurt that I felt, because I felt that I was betrayed. And I chose to move forward. And one of the things is that when you put out positive, you tend to get positive in return. And so I was able to really get to know myself, get to know God, really learn how to meditate and how to pray. And I developed coping skills that helped me to become a better person. And so I look back at my 16 years not as a horrific time, but as a time of exponential growth for me as a person. And I was allowed the privilege of being able to help others along the way. And as a result of that, I learned how to parent from prison. You know, I would write to my daughter to the point that every week she would wait on the porch for the mailman to bring the letter. And if she didn't get it, she would, you know, when I would call home, she'd say, Mom, I don't know what's going on with this mail system, but I didn't get my letter this week, but I know you mailed it, because she knew that her mama was going to send that letter. And then she would color me pictures, and then when she learned how to write, I would get letters on the big cornbread paper with just where she was learning her letters. And then eventually it turned into cards that she would make and different things. Unfortunately, now the federal system no longer allows those things to be sent in. You can't receive that from your family anymore. They say that drugs are being put onto the paper and different things, and so they don't allow that anymore. So you just have to get more creative with how you communicate with your children. I learned how to crochet. I did leather crafts, so I would always make her things. I couldn't be at her basketball games, but she would have hand painted socks with her number on it. That was really fly. The other kids would say, "Where'd you get those?" And I can recall one year I did them for the entire team. So there are ways that you can continue to bond with your children. Is it easy? No. Does it hurt? Yeah. And when they bring them to see you, you know, you're so happy to see them, but you're watching the clock the entire time, because you know that 2:30 or 3 o'clock is going to roll around and they have to go. And when they're small, it's really hard because they cling to you and they literally have to pry them off your body. And you're trying not to cry because you don't want to make it harder for them. But then as soon as you get out of the general area, you break down because it feels like your heart's being ripped out.
Yeah.
And then as they get older, you know, everybody kind of sucks it up and we thug it out a little bit, and it's not as hard. You don't display it as much, but it still hurts because the only thing that you want is to be able to get in the car and go with them. And but you just have to, you know, keep the lines of communication open. I was fortunate that my parents were able to send me money so that I could call home, because the calls are very expensive. For a 15-minute phone call, it can run you right around $4.
Oh yeah.
And you have a limited number of minutes every month that you can use. Fortunately, during COVID, they have suspended all phone call costs. So you're able to call home because visitation has been basically shut down in the federal system for over a year. So people haven't been able to see their families. So they will allow you to call home free or email free, which only leads me to believe that they could have been doing that the whole time.
Man, listen, I have a lot of, you know, friends and family that are incarcerated. You know, some of them are home, some of them do have life. But what I want to move into, especially when we're talking about this prison, and you were mentioning like how it is modern day slavery, and then we were talking about stocks and investors. Like, let's move into that lane. I want to know more about that right there.
Well, there's a new investment vehicle called the private prison. And these are prisons that are owned by companies like CCA, Correctional Companies of America. And there's several others. And basically, they operate prisons mainly on the state level, but there are some contracts with the federal system, mainly for ICE detainees. But they do operate within the federal system, and there has been an outcry for the Biden administration to terminate those contracts. He has indicated that he will, but it has not happened as of yet. But they operate these prisons, and their stock is publicly traded. So therefore, your 401k from your job may be invested in one of those stocks. So you in turn own a piece of a prison. So you may be responsible for incarcerating people that are paid slave wages. In the federal system, they start you out at 12 cents an hour, or you can be put on what's called maintenance pay, where you make $5.25 per month.
Now, hold on a second. So a person may be unaware that their 401k is being invested into this particular prison system. Mm-hmm. But okay, so what do you say to the person that, because there are some people that, I mean, we do need prisons.
Yes.
because there are some people that, that are committing crimes that are ferocious. And it's like, man, I would
Right.
rather that person be in prison than out here roaming in the streets. However, there are people that are innocently put in prison.
Mm-hmm.
So what would be your argument to that? Like, okay, I got 401k going in there, but how would first of all, how would somebody know that their money's going to that particular stock?
Well, in your 401k, it tells you what companies they're invested in. It's much like when Coca-Cola back in the 80s was invested in South Africa, and there was a big cry. They boycotted Coca-Cola to get them to divest in companies that supported apartheid. Mm-hmm. It's the same principle here. You should not profit off of the labor of inmates. The issue is not that they're investing in the prison. The issue is that these prisons make products, whether it's mattresses, whether it's license plates, mm-hmm. whether it's, many different things. And the workers are not paid. There's been some calls for the prison workers to be unionized, where they can make a livable wage to be able to bank, so that when they come out, they're not coming out without any resources. But to make 12 cents an hour, in 2021, does that make any sense to anyone? No.
So what are some of you said the correction something?
Correctional Companies of America.
Now, are there any stocks that you know of that, like, or companies that's like wow, I didn't know that we were investing in that?
I know that there are some,
because that's a huge talk going around now. Did you get your stocks? Did you get your stocks? Did you invest in this? Did you invest in this?
These are mainly like your 401ks, where there's a bundle and they're investigating through like a hedge fund type situation. Okay. So you just need to look at what you're investing in and know the names. Google it. Right. Google the companies that are private prisons, and they do tend to change names sometimes to sort of reinvent themselves if they get bad press about things. So, just be aware of what you're investing in, and just be aware of what's going on. And that's what these type of podcasts are important, because we do raise awareness.
Now, the company is called Can Do Clemency. That you're working with.
Can Do Clemency is one of several advocacy organizations that I work with. Can Do Clemency was the leading organization that advocated for me with my clemency, which ultimately was granted by President Trump. I did apply under President Obama, and I was denied, which was, I didn't understand that, because I met all the criteria. Mm-hmm. However, the interesting thing about clemency is that it occurs through the Office of the Pardon Attorney, and the Office of the Pardon Attorney is under the Department of Justice. So the same people that prosecute you are therefore then the people to decide if whether or not you're deserving of a second chance. And it's sort of like letting the fox guard the hen house. And if you didn't cooperate with them and they didn't like your case, then your chances of getting clemency may not be so great. The different thing that President Trump did was that he set up his own committee to investigate clemencies within the White House. That was headed by Jared Kushner, and then he tasked Alice Johnson, who was a incarcerated woman she had a life sentence, and he released her, and then she became a very dynamic criminal justice advocate. She spoke at the Republican National Convention, and a lot of people do Alice a real disservice because they say, she's a sellout, she's one of Trump's people. And all I can say to that is, do you think a slave cares what master frees them? No, we don't. We care about the freedom, and we care about the people that we left behind. And it's important that we reach across the aisle and work with anyone that is willing to hear about the injustices that are going on in the court system and inside these prisons.
Well, I'm all about the value of relationships. So anything that's bringing people back together, especially a person that's, serving a time or serving a sentence that's been given to them through injustice, and now they have the opportunity to reunite with their family. Because I was checking out the site, and there's hundreds of cases out there with men and women. I was reading about it, even when women are pregnant and they're being handcuffed and chained up, right, and brought to the prison institution. You had cases like Meek Mill. Mm-hmm. released from prison, go back to prison, released from prison, on probation for so many years, which was just ridiculous. That's a whole nother conversation. But how many people do you know, like offhand, that you could like? Is it like hundreds of women and men in this position right now that you guys are advocating for? Thousands.
If you commit a crime, you should have to. You should have repercussions for that.
Right.
But it shouldn't be lifelong repercussions. For instance, even I'll use my case as an example. I received clemency, so you would think, okay, it's over for her. It's not, because I still owe. It was originally $12 million in restitution. It accrues at an interest rate of, I think it's like 17% compounded daily, some crazy amount formula that they use. So now it's at about 17 million that I now owe. And I still am responsible for paying that. So I cannot own any assets. I cannot purchase a home. I have to pay through, I'm on probation. I have to pay a certain amount every month. And then they have a part of the Department of Justice called the Financial Litigation Unit. And they in turn come for additional collections. So I may be subject to having to pay even more. Now you're considering the fact that I was an attorney, but I'm just barred, and I have skills, but I've been away for 16 years. So just think where you were technology wise 16 years ago. So I'm coming out and everything is different. Mm-hmm. I couldn't even make a phone call when I got in the car because I couldn't even figure out how you swipe on the phone. And so it has really been an Alice in Wonderland experience for me. And I'm pretty smart. So I read a lot while I was inside, all the tech magazines and things, so I could sort of keep up with terminology. But you are truly at a disadvantage. And now everything has an app. You have to use your phone for this. You have to pay electronically. And you're not used to that. So, and then you're coming home having to readjust to living in a different type of society. You're dealing with your family. A lot of them still expect you to be the same person you were before, and you've changed.
Let me ask you this: in your case, I mean, of course, that's a lot of psychological trauma.
Yes.
So I don't know if they provided those services while you were in prison. I know some of my friends who came out of prison, they didn't get any of those type of services, no special counseling. They're just released and they're back into the streets, and the streets is full of drama and trauma and craziness and crime, and they're trying to maintain their mental stability with having to do what you said, like, I got to pay this, I got to do this. And here's the thing, I'm not making light of you did something, you went in there, you came out, and here's what's going on. But I still believe there should be some type of, rehabilitation. So you come home, and now this mental trauma, like, how are you coping with that and dealing with,
A lot of prayer and a lot of mentoring from other women and men who have walked the experience. Mm-hmm. And I, in turn, try to mentor those coming behind me. And kind of let them know and how to maneuver through that whole thing. Even with getting a job, you get out, you have no ID, so you got to try to get your social security card. You got to try to get a birth certificate. Then you have to make an appointment with the DMV to try to either get your driver's license or get a state ID. But that could take 2, 3, 4 months, especially during COVID, because they're not even doing regular appointments. So without an ID, you can't get a job. Without a job, you can't work. So if you're trying to do it the right way, and then you have the streets calling over here that's like, hey, we can just hit this lick, we can do this, we can do that, and you've got nothing in your pocket, you may have saved up money while you were in prison, but you were only making 12 cents an hour. Maybe if you were top pay, $1.35 an hour. And you could save I was very frugal with my money, and I left out with a little over $1,000. And that was with me really denying myself a lot of different things.
Hold on a second, though. For those that are watching and listening, in no way, once again, am I making light of people that commit crimes and they go to prison and they're dealing with the consequences. We are more so highlighting those that are getting ferocious sentences for lenient crimes, petty crimes per se, misdemeanors and getting life sentences. We're talking about that. And so $1,000 out of 16 years. And then you have to do, now that mental trauma and anguish though, when you're back out, if you don't have the mental stability, yes, that street call or that call from whomever could almost have you like, you know what? Forget it, man.
Well, you get into a mindset where you feel like, I don't deserve to be treated any better. I made this mistake and I'm going to be punished for it for the rest of my life. And you have to push yourself to get beyond that and say, okay, yeah, I made a mistake. I look at my situation and I hold myself accountable, not for what was in my indictment, because I didn't do what was in my indictment, but I made a lot of mistakes, even with associating myself with people that didn't have my best interests at heart. And I turned a blind eye to a lot of things. It led me to being affiliated with people that led to my indictment. So I always talk, when I used to speak to younger people while I was in prison, when they would bring groups in or we would go out to speak to groups, I would always talk about walking in a gray area. And gray areas will get you in trouble. And so now I see things in my life as very black and white. Either I'm going to do it or I'm not going to do it. Either this person is on the up and up, or I have to not affiliate myself with this person. Because under no circumstances am I ever going back to prison. I'm just not. I can't do it again, and I won't do it again. So if it means that I go to a cookout and there's some people there and there's different little things going on, and I'm looking at this like, well, if my probation officer were to walk up right now, what would happen? If I feel any type of hesitancy, I'm speaking, hey, I stopped by for a second, I gotta go. You just have to value yourself that much until you can get yourself to a point. One of the biggest things is with applying for jobs. So you hear a lot of people talking about ban the box. Should you be denied even an opportunity for a job because you're a felon if it's not related to the job? Now, obviously, with someone like me, white collar, I had to mine dealt with the filing of deeds at the courthouse. So it would be logical that I couldn't go to the courthouse and work in the Register of Deeds office. That would make sense that they wouldn't want me to work there. But if I went to work in the water department reading meters, what does that have to do with my crime? Nothing. But with the way applications are, and with the they ask, have you ever been convicted of a felony? You say yes. And when they say they don't discriminate, but you know that those go into another pile. So then what happens is people either leave it blank or they check no, and then they get hired. And then later on, when they do a background check for random reasons, sometimes they find out that you lied, and then they fire you for falsification. So it's sort of like a damned if you do, damned if you don't type philosophy. So ban the box would take care of all of that, where they can't ask you that question until they're ready to extend you an office. So at least you can be competitive, because you're already coming out from prison with minimal skills because technology has passed you so much. So in prison, if you have to type up legal pleadings, you still use a typewriter. There's probably the only place on earth that people are still using typewriters. So you may feel that you've got secretarial skills because you can type 100 words per minute on a typewriter, but you get out and they give you a laptop and you don't even know how to turn it on. And I'm not exaggerating, but we're talking about people that have done 20, 25, 30 years that are coming home. So what can you do? You can get a job as maybe a janitor, because mops are pretty much the same, and then what does that give you? A livable wage? No. So you've paid your debt to society by your body being imprisoned, but there are all these collateral consequences that people don't consider that continue to go on. There was an article in today's Washington Post that talked about how the federal trust fund system, which is your bank account while you're in prison, so it's where when your family wants to put money on your books, it goes into your trust fund account, and where your paycheck that you get, it goes into your account, where people, incarcerated people are hiding money in their accounts, and some people have $100,000 in their account, and these monies are not being taxed, and it's considered money laundering because anyone can put the money in your books. And the whole article was so slanted and biased because when you're in prison, if you're sentenced to restitution, they make you pay it while you're in prison. So every paycheck that I earned while I was in prison, they took 50% of it to go towards my restitution, which went into this account that didn't even go to the victims. They just kept it. And then upon my release, it went into a bigger fund, and it goes into this deep well, and you really don't even know if your victim is ever paid or not.
So hold on, if there's this type of account like that, that's just one person, which is you, one prisoner. Mm-hmm. But if I got hundreds of thousands of prisoners and that money's going in there, mm-hmm. I'm banking.
Yeah, the federal government is holding our money, and they draw interest on it. You don't draw interest on it. But when you have someone that has $50,000 on their account or $100,000 in their account, that could be because they had a parent that died and left them a life insurance policy. They don't have bank accounts on the outside anymore, and you can't open up a bank account while you're in prison. Or you could have sold your house or your assets or something, and so those monies are on there. But the majority of the people don't have any money, which is why there's a counterculture that goes on inside of trading and bartering and all sorts of other things that are going on inside, because people have to try to make a wage. When they sell you things at the commissary, which is the store, mm-hmm. they're not prison prices, they're real prices. So like a shampoo and a conditioner will run you $15. Well, if you only make 12 cents a month, that's $30. Well, it's $28 and some change. So half of your money goes if you want to buy a shampoo and a conditioner, and then if you owe restitution, they're going to take the other half and you're left with no money. So it's not the way that they're trying to make it seem like there are people that are hiding hundreds of thousands of dollars on their books. That's not the case. Or you could be someone like me that just chooses to not go to the store. I would try to be as conservative. Like I would buy my basic hygienes, and I wouldn't buy snacks, and I wouldn't buy different things to try to hold on as much money as possible, because I knew that every dollar that my family sent to me was a dollar that didn't go to my daughter. So if it was a matter of her being able to sign up for basketball or pay for her uniform, or me not having money to buy tuna and sausages at commissary, guess what? Mom was going to go to the kitchen and eat it no matter how bad the food was, because my baby was going to have what she needed. Mm-hmm. And so you have to make checks and balances. And then I would save my money. And then if my daughter needed something, it really made me feel good to be able to order a check to be sent to her, for, here's that $100 that you need for this, or here's this registration fee. And it may have left me bankrupt on this end, but I didn't care. And then you have people that put money on their books so they can take classes. Because when you're in there, you do have the opportunity to do correspondence courses through different colleges, but you have to pay for it yourself. So in this article in the Washington Post today, it doesn't talk about any of that. It doesn't talk about the fact that the Federal Bureau of Prisons, if you're responsible for restitution, that they take 50% of your money, or they work out a plan where you have to pay a certain amount every month. And it never gets paid because the restitutions are in the hundreds and thousands of dollars. So even when you're out, you're never going to be able to pay it. If I owe $16 million, short of winning lotto, I'm never going to pay that. But yet you took my career as a lawyer for 16 years, where I would have been making a good wage and would have really been able to pay something. You took that away because you sent me to prison. So it's like you're wanting my life because you incarcerated me, and then when I come out, now you still want my life because I have to pay this judgment for the next 20 years, and then you can renew it for an additional 20 years. So I'm on the hook for the next 40 years. So if I live to be 96, 97, 98, 99, I might not have this on my neck anymore.
So first of all, that's crazy. You're given an insane time, and white counterparts or the other.
Well, this with the restitution, it's across the board. The issue that comes with that is how they choose to enforce it. Who do they come after to try to collect the money?
No, I'm saying here's the thing. Even in terms of the time, the sentencing, because there's a lot of people out there that are getting sentenced. You know what I mean? Like they did a crime. We understand that.
Yes.
But then you have you have a white person. Let me just say that, and they get lesser time. 30 for the man that gets 27 months and you're getting 30 years sentence. Yeah. That's ridiculous. Yeah. So they get 27 months, they come home, at least they still have a fair amount of time to kind of build something, even though they might be going through mental trauma, whatever the case may be. And now you come home after 16 years, and to other not innocent people, but to other people who have done lesser crimes, and they're getting 50 years or 30 years or 10 years, whatever the amount of years are, and then they have to come home. I've heard these stories and seen them on the news, and now they're back in society. You got to deal with the mental trauma. You got to deal with the monetary portion of your life, the reconnecting with family and the relationships that some have maybe been distraught or some have got tighter. Most of them have got distraught because you got to try to rebuild and rekindle things. Your lack of information and knowledge. So somebody watching this or listening to this, what would you say to that person who may be they just came out of a situation like that and they're back out here because they may be listening or watching my podcast, or somebody who's out there and they're involved in some shaky stuff and they may be like, oh, well, I'm cool. Even if it's just petty, because they may think, oh, you know what, if I get caught with this particular type of thing that I'm doing, it's not that bad. I'm not going to get that much time. But they may end up in a position like you, where they get 50 years for a bag of marijuana. Because I read something on the website. There was somebody who got had just a couple bags of marijuana and they got 20 years in prison. Right. That's insane.
Right. Once you're indicted, you lose control. And you can, unless you have the ability to hire a lawyer with a 6-figure fee, you're probably going to end up pleading, and then you may or may not get a good deal. Depends on what they're choosing to prosecute. What kind of task force do they have? Right now they have a task force for PPP, the payroll protection program. And all these people that got this money during COVID, they're now coming along and they're scooping everybody up. And what I'm finding is that Black and brown people are getting time, and non-minority people are getting probation. And you can look at it yourself and look at the names, and if they have a foreign name, or if their name Malik Abdul, whatever, they're getting longer sentences. And it's the same crime. A lot of it depends on the district where you are. If you're in Georgia, you're going to get slammed. The 11th Circuit is brutal. Texas is brutal. Florida is brutal when it comes to giving out long sentences. But the bigger issue is that what America needs to think about is, how much time does it take to reform a person? Am I any better person if I'd served 2 years versus 16 years? And so the sentences are much too long all the way around, unless you're like a truly violent offender. And I'm not saying that there are not people that are a danger to society that need to be evaluated under a different set of circumstances. Mm-hmm. But for the average person that is there for drugs, either for selling or they have a substance abuse issue. With substance abuse issues, you need treatment. You don't need incarceration. Taking you away from it does not solve your problem, because when you get out and you're exposed to it, you're going to go right back to using. So it's a revolving door. The same thing with people that commit fraud. If you can't get a job to pay your bills, you're going to go back to committing fraud. And I'm not justifying it. I'm just saying that it is an endless cycle. And education and opportunity are the only ways to end that. Mm-hmm. And in federal prison, there is no education program other than to give you a GED. There used to be training programs for HVAC, for plumbing, for electrical, where you could come out and actually make a really good wage. But those programs have been dismantled. And under the First Step Act, they were supposed to restart all those programs, but because of COVID, the Federal Bureau of Prisons has now said, oh, well, we're not able to do any of that. There were cosmetology programs and barbering programs and skills that people could learn and be able to come out. But the girls that graduated from Cosmo and guys that graduated from barbering, they get out, and because they weren't able to pay child support while they're out, they can't get a license to barber. So you have a skill, but you can't do anything with it. So it is a multi-layer failure on so many different levels. But I think people just have to be aware of what's going on, and unless it directly impacts you, most people don't think about it. And so that's why shows like yours are so important, to shine a light on what's going on.
And that's what exactly I exist for. Well, one of the reasons I exist for this value podcast. And man, Chay McFarland, man, I'm gonna sit back and listen to this and watch this myself, man, because I know that there's a lot of information that was shared and I wasn't able to retain it all even while listening. But there's so much value in this conversation. There's so many people. There's a lot of families out there that I know, some I know personally, and then some I don't know, that have relatives that are that were in your situation, or they're in your situation now. Just came home and they got an ankle bracelet on and got 15 years on an ankle bracelet or 20 years left on an ankle bracelet, and they're trying to get back into society. And so, yeah, we're gonna definitely blast this as loud as possible. I thank you again for coming on. Tell people about some things that you may be doing now or resources, and that for those that are listening, I'll definitely put those on the video.
Well, the first thing I would say is that any of you all that have businesses that are looking to hire, you can contact the halfway house. You can hire felons. We work really hard. We have to be accountable to our probation officers and to the halfway house. So we're going to show up, we're going to be on time, and we're going to work hard. Give us an opportunity. We will not let you down. So that's my PSA on that. Secondly, with me, I'm just doing a lot of speaking. I have my book that will be coming out in August or September called Collateral Consequences, that I talk about my federal experience and a lot of things that I encountered. And we're finishing up that, so I'll come on again when that comes out. Let's see, what else am I doing? I'm on something called the Justice Roundtable, where I am one of the only formerly incarcerated people that help make policy as far as what goes on in this country. There are a lot of people that care about the criminal justice system. The thing about it is that they never really ask the formerly incarcerated and the incarcerated what they need. They make policy without us, and then we find out that it really can't be implemented. So a lot of good work with good intentions, but it gets misdirected. So it's important that those of us that are incarcerated and formerly incarcerated have a voice. If you know someone that's incarcerated, or you know their family, reach out to the family. $20 goes a long way in any prison. Drop some money off. Offer to take their kids with your kids to the water park this summer. Just try to be there, because as a community, I believe we can survive this epidemic that's going on, but it's going to take all of us to do that.